Welcome back. I hope you're feeling really good about the progress that you've made on your portrait so far. Our next step is working on the clothing and then going back in and adding eyebrows and eyelashes and playing with the value just a little bit more on the face and the neck. So in this video, I'm going to go through that process with you. I'm going to fast forward and voice over my instruction. So if you feel like pausing and you want to look at something a little slower, feel free to do so. The next step after this is doing the background and then finishing line quality. So there's only one more video and one more major step once you're done with this. You're doing great. It's a lot of hard work. Push through. You got this, my friends. I've worked all the way down through Zoe's face. There's some work still needing to be done up there, eyebrows, eyelashes, probably perfecting some shadows and things, but I want to wait to do that until I've got her shirt and her hair done, and I can really look at how all the values play together. At this point, I'm ready to start working on clothing. And a lot of times when my students get to clothing, they kind of rush through it. And, I think part of it is this has been a long, hard journey making this portrait, and clothing doesn't seem as important. But doing the clothing well can really add a lot to your piece, and doing it poorly can detract a lot from your piece. So if you've got a beautifully drawn face, hair, and then your clothing just looks flat, it doesn't work very well. So some things to look for in your clothing is how they bend and they fold. Are there folds? There's not a lot of clothing in Zoe's image, but I can see that her collar of her shirt kind of has some movement to it. There's a seam right here that you might not be able to pick up on the camera that I want to put in there. There's a texture to her shirt, and I'm not quite sure if I want to have this texture, if I want to kind of flatten it out a little bit or not. That's something I'm going to decide as I go. I just want to look at the shadow structures. Where do I see shadows on her shirt, along the collar? Where do I see highlights in that space as well? And really making sure to amplify those. Again, you don't see much here with Zoe's shirt, both with folds and with the value structures, but really look for that in your clothing as you build it up. You're also going to want to think about what mark is going to work best for that particular clothing object you're wearing. Is it going to work best with a hatch or a cross hatch? Cross hatch often works really lovely for like a t-shirt material or simple woven material. If it's like a sweater or something like that, you might need to do a more complicated mark and some scumbling. But take some time really thinking about what marks to use, where the shadows are, where the highlights are, and where the folds are, and then just work down through that process carefully. In Zoe's piece, a big part of finishing her piece down here is going to be finishing up her hair as well. That will be something that I work on as I work through finishing the last couple rows of Zoe's portrait. I'm going to start by erasing any other grid lines that I have so you can't see them anymore, and I'm drawing in the seams on my clothing. The next thing I do, just like I do everywhere else, is I build in the form shadows on the clothing. I'm looking for the darkest shadows, I'm drawing those in, and I'm leaving the highlights behind. This helps me to know where to push shadows darker and where to leave things lighter as I start to build in darker values. Pay careful attention to those folds and where the values sit on them. Zoe happens to have hair that goes over her clothing, so I'm also going to be working on drawing that in as I finish up her shirt. Take your time in these areas. You're going to have to draw the shirt, the clothing between the strands of hair. So you want to really kind of think about how that hair interacts with the clothing. And if it's casting shadows like you can see on the right side of this piece. The other thing that you want to keep in mind is the details of the clothing. Her sweatshirt has the word Wisconsin on it. But I've decided to leave that out of the drawing as I think it's a distraction. It doesn't add anything to the drawing, and in this drawing, the world is mine, so I can make it what I want it to be. I've started to use my 2B pencil here to darken in the values on the clothing and her hair as it comes over the shirt. Her shirt is quite dark, almost black, a dark kind of charcoal gray. So the overall value in the shirt is quite dark, including the areas that are highlights. So I'm building up those values slowly, trying to be careful of edges where the shirt interacts with the hair, letting the hair kind of taper out as it comes down, and just kind of slowly building in those strands. If you remember, and I say this a lot, drawing is a layering process, so build it slowly. Take your time. When I come down into the sweatshirt area in the center here, I'm paying careful attention to the collar and the values that happen around the collar because there's a lot of transitions. I'm also building in kind of the puckering that happens on the seams, kind of scumbled out these little triangular shapes where the stitches would be. And then when I draw my value over them, it kind of pushes that back a little bit, but it's a really nice subtle detail that you notice when you look at the drawing up close. And subtle details are always just kind of delicious little things to add to a drawing. I highly suggest paying attention to those things. They add quite a bit. And I'm just continuing to darken in my clothing, building up my layers, paying attention to where there's highlights and shadows, building, 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 building. You'll notice the more layers I have, the smoother this shirt looks. And that happens in light areas too. The more layers you built up, the cleaner the finished appearance of the piece. At this point, I'm going in and kind of darkening the darkest areas of the shirt, like the inner parts of the seams. I'm separating the hair out on the left side just a little bit more with a nice sharp 2B pencil as well. Now I'm working through the right side of her hair, continuing to build those values in, paying attention to where there's highlights and shadows, trying to blend those lines nicely, working on the shadow structures in between her hair as well. The ends on the right side of her hair I have not finished completely because they kind of hang out into the background space. When I add the background space, I'll define the ends of her hair on that side of her face as well. Just remember as you do this process to read those shadow structures and highlight structures just as carefully as you did on the face. Take your time and build it slow. At this point, I've worked the value out through the whole piece, and I need to go back in, clean up my value a little bit, add eyelashes, add eyebrows, and just really make the whole piece work as a whole. A great first step in this is to set it up, step back a good 6 to 12 feet, kind of take a look at what is working and what is not. Notice where you're missing things. I notice when I step back that I start to lose her lips a little bit, so I need to work those in just a little bit darker. I'll probably blend out, layer up some of my darker shadows a little bit more, blend those in a little more, push just these subtle values, maybe a hair darker, and I'll kind of see what those look like once I've added the eyebrows and eyelashes. Usually start at the bottom and I'm working my way back up. I'm just kind of blending my values. I'm looking for where the core shadows are in each of my shadows and pushing them just a little bit darker. I'm doing that with my 2B, and then I come back in with my HB and blend it out. Added a little more value into her upper lip, underneath her chin, kind of pushing the values darker on the shadows on the left side of her chin. At this point, I'm ready to go in to do eyelashes and eyebrows. I have sharpened my 2B pencil and my HB pencil till it has a really, really fine point. When you do the eyebrows, you want to go in, take a look in the mirror at your eyebrow hairs and look at the direction that they flow. Look at where they're thicker and where they're thinner. And what you're doing with that pencil is mimicking those eyebrow hairs. You can see it a lot better when I do the right eyebrow. Pay attention to the flow of the eyebrow. Oftentimes the upper outside part of your eyebrow, the hair flows down and in. The inner part you can see goes up, starts to turn to the right or the outside. Then as they come down, they kind of grow towards the center, above and below. You also want to pay attention to where the darkest parts of your eyebrows are and the areas of your eyebrows that are a little bit lighter. The center of the eyebrow tends to be a little darker, so you can get darker in there, and the beginning part near your nose tends to be lighter. For eyelashes, use a super sharp HB. Take your time. Go back to the eye video where I talk about eyelashes a little bit more. Remember, they're darker nearest the eyelid. Going into the forehead, adding little baby hairs, and touching up any value that I've got in there that I want to modify. At this point, then it's a really great time to take a step back and really study your piece, identify areas that need to be lighter or darker, and then modify what needs to be done before we start with our next step, which is background.